Today, we're going to talk to Greg Geeson. Geese, as everybody knows him, he's an Aspect member, but he's also a life coach, a management trainer, a speaker, a storyteller, a radio show host, a college professor, and an author. We're going to talk about his being an author today. We're going to talk about one of his books called Journey to Self. You may recognize the person on the cover. And I'm going to sit down for this. But I do want to mention that we'll be having a social immediately after this. Geese is going to be sponsoring the social.
Oh,
So he's been up all day cooking, as I understand it.
you have to buy a book then?
Hold on. And there's an opportunity to win a free book.
Oh.
He's gonna spin the wheel. Somehow he's got some kind of game wheel. And if some of you drink enough wine, we may start a gambling thing. But let's talk about the book. Actually, you may note these books look remarkably similar. So the first question for Geese is, you re-released the book under a new title. Why would you do such a thing?
Such an easy question and such a difficult answer. When I wrote this about 4 years ago, it was really going to be a legacy book about my life, my favorite stories, and I wasn't going to put it on Amazon. I wasn't going to sell it. I was just going to give it away to friends and family. That was kind of the plan, but the publisher put it on Amazon anyways. And then over the last couple of years, I've been getting these emails from people I don't know, never met. I don't even know how they got the book. And in these emails, they would tell me about how significant the book was for them. And they would actually get specific about titles and how it like changed their mindset or something like that. And so when that kept happening, I started to realize that, I've got something here I need to do something with instead of just give it away, because it's really a teaching book in many respects. And so as a result of that, I decided to get a little more serious. And so I hired a marketing person. And the first thing she said was, "Can we change the title?" And actually, I was so glad she said that, because I got so tired of it explaining, because it's not meant to be narcissistic title. It was meant to be sarcastic. That my friends and family would appreciate, because I'm never, it's all about me guy. So I thought, as my last book, that would be a fitting title. And so now, with Journey, ironically, and I don't know if Henry's watching on Zoom, but I was trying to come up with a new title and I couldn't come up with one. And so I went to my AI app. I explained what the book was and I asked for 5 suggestions. And the very first one was Journey to Self, and it resonated at such a high level with me, because that really is what the book's about. So it became a no-brainer at that point. And I just noticed with myself that I have a totally different energy around that book, because now I want to promote it, whereas here I felt like I had to justify it. Same book, but that's what a title can do, the significance of a title.
So in looking at the title to the book, Journey to Self, it's about presume it's about the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
So this is a memoir of things from your life, stories you want to tell, lessons you've learned.
Yeah, in my career as a corporate trainer, college professor, a keynote speaker, I learned early on, thanks to Toastmasters, which maybe we'll talk about later, that at least for me, I teach best through story. In other words, using a story and then teaching off the story. And it's also a way for the listener to use both their right and left brain while they're listening, because both are active when you're telling a story. And so as a result of that, I was kind of motivated to kind of come up with stories to fit all the various classes and trainings I was doing, whether it's conflict or presentation skills or communication skills or team dynamics, whatever it was. And I realized I actually had a plethora of stories. And so I was motivated to kind of think those through and how I could use them in my talks. And so essentially, this book is a lot of those stories that I have worked for me for about, number of years. And so that's really kind of the base of the book.
And so, one unique aspect of the book is in each of these chapters, each of these stories, or most of them, I should say, you provide a lessons learned
Mhm.
at the end, kind of like a fable, would do. Why did you decide to do that?
Like when I would present a story, whether it was in class or as a keynoter, the learning came through the discussion afterwards, right? Like foreign films here. You watch the movie, then you talk about it, and the talking part is really where the learning and you can kind of get into the movie that way. So that was kind of how I always taught. Like that would be the discussion afterwards. And so I felt like for this book to be complete, I wanted to add that in many, not all the stories have it, but I wanted to add kind of my perspective after the fact and what I learned from it, because that's what I'm finding is where people start to question themselves about the story, because they put themselves in the story and then they get a diagnosis after the story, and that's where the thinking kind of goes even more deeper. And so I couldn't do it without that piece, basically.
Okay. So you mentioned that you've heard from people who've read the book, people you don't know. What kind of things did they tell you?
Funny you should ask that question. These are the two that I got, like, I think maybe 3 months ago, like within the same week, that motivated me to do a paradigm shift on this book. So I'm just going to read them to you and put yourself in my shoes as you hear this. Like, let's say it's a book you wrote. It wasn't for anything special, and then you get these kind of comments and think about how that might change your perspective. Right? I just finished reading your book that I just started 2 days ago. I wish the book never ended. It was funny, enlightening, interesting, and meaningful. I especially loved the chain reaction, which will be a story I'll read later, and my park bench. Like they're naming chapters. One made me gasp in horror, and the other made me laugh out loud, which while both having an important and useful message. So thank you for sharing and constructing your stories so that it was difficult to put the book down. The length of the stories was just right, and I could have read 100 more. And then followed by this one. Hey, I started
Did you
reading.
sign that mom or?
Funny, Bob. Hey, I started reading your book. I've already cried. I've skipped around a bit, but I always do that. First off, the chapter about Bailey, which is my dog. Oh my God, so sad and so happy he survived. The chapter about thinking something but not saying it was amazing. And I always said that I wanted to create a platform, a safe place for people to come together to express directly to each other how they have influenced their lives and changed it, or just how they feel about them. Then your ex-girlfriend, Lori, it's another story. Oh my God, that's crazy and a conundrum for sure. It's hard to put the book down. I love it. So you see what I'm talking about? I'm like, I got something here. I got a teaching tool. What am I doing sitting on? I got to do something with it.
That's great, I understand.
Yeah.
So this book has 34 stories or chapters, but in the end, it has 8 simple rules to managing conflict. which is not a story, but why did you decide to add that?
Well, I mean, I've been a conflict mediator for 20, maybe 25 years. And, and I'm a teacher, right? I think that way. And so I realized that, there's a lot of books on conflict and it's, these 10 steps or these whatever. But nobody's ever written a book from the perspective of the conflict mediator. Like what I've learned about conflict and mediating conflict between two people or a team or whatever. And so I wrote, and actually there's what, I think there's 7 or 8 chapters around the 8 simple rules, but they have stories in them as well. But I just threw that in as a bonus because I really had nowhere to put that either. But I thought it's still stories, it's still teaching, and it's a new perspective on conflict resolution that people might not have heard before.
We have a number of authors in Aspect, but we probably more of us that have stories in us or a book in us. Tell us a little bit about the writing experience for you. How do you go about it? What's your approach?
Well, I have to give you some context for how kind of this came about. So I had this talk radio show for 6 years. It was just like 1 hour a week. It wasn't like it. And actually I did that for 6 years, and that's why I changed Meet Our Members to an interview process, because I loved doing interviews. And so that was my way to keep that alive, doing it that way. But as a result, I needed to promote the radio show and my upcoming guests. And so then I created like a newsletter. And then I realized I kind of had an audience who was looking at the newsletter. So I should be promoting my business in that news, so I kept adding pieces, and I added a blog every week. And so the blog created the space for me to start writing, because I never thought I was a writer. I didn't think I could write. And so then I would fall back on stories, and I made them, the thing about a blog is they've got to be short and sweet. All the stories in here are short and sweet, they start as a blog. And the nice thing about having a blog is you don't have to publish it until you feel like one of them's worthy. And what I didn't realize at the time is I was creating this book. And after I had enough stories in there, you want me to get that? Sam, tell them I'm busy. And so the one thing I would say is, for starters, if you can create a blog, and basically it's a website where you just write something, and then when you feel like it's worthy of being read, you can put it on Facebook, you can put it on LinkedIn, you can do whatever you want, just the one story, and test it out. And then it could even be a chapter to a book of your life or something like that. And then you can keep building on it. And then all of a sudden you have momentum, and then it becomes a lot easier. The second part I would say is, in the back is my first book, which is a novel. It was a management novel. Because I was a management trainer guru, so I felt like, from a marketing standpoint, I need a book. And I got into writer's block continuously. Like, I even spent a whole weekend in San Diego, and I came back with one paragraph. And it was so frustrating because I was telling in my story, telling people how to do this, how to do that. And I kept wordsmithing and being overly critical of everything I just wrote, and I was getting nowhere. So I was ready to give it up. But at the same time, and you might or you might not remember this, because I was writing business books, management books. A lot of fables were popular then, like Who Moved My Cheese? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. That was the first one that started this 3-year thing of these silly little books that have 5 points, and it's a silly little story, but they were popular. They're 120 pages, and these authors are becoming famous. So I saw those, but I didn't want to just add another fable to the list. And I realized nobody had ever written a management novel before. Of course, now I know why. Nobody reads them. But I was gonna do it anyways, like and you'll see it back there, it's called Mondays at 3, and the reason I'm telling you this story is because it created the breakthrough in my writing. Is that I realized that if I could tell a story, a management story, and I could make it interactive. And then you never get stuck when you use dialogue in a story, because you either just stop the chapter, or you enter a new character, or one of the characters throws a curve. And all of a sudden the conversation now goes in a different direction. And so it got me out of my writer's block, and it made it fun to write. In fact, and then I would go to Starbucks, and I did this with this book as well. Just sit down with a big cup of coffee, because I needed some stimulation in the background with my laptop. And I would just create in the moment, a dialogue story that went to the next point. And that's how I built momentum. And so I incorporated the dialogue also into this book. And it just flowed, like it gave me a writer's flow that I never, ever had. And you don't have to be smart to do that. All you have to do is create an interesting dialogue that gets to some of the points you want to get to. But then you get the benefit of creating conflict, strife. Like the book I wrote, the management book, it goes into his family, his, all these problems he had. And then ironically, I'm telling you more than you wanted to know, but there's two main characters in the book. It's a struggling supervisor who makes every mistake possible. And he meets an old guy, retired, who actually sounds a lot like me, and who had a radio show. And they accidentally meet, and this older gentleman was a business guru. And so every Monday at 3, hence the title, they would meet at a park bench. And this struggling supervisor would talk out a problem. And that was how I taught management skills, was through these two. And then eventually they form like a mentor relationship. And then it turns into a Tuesdays with Maury, where the older gentleman passes away. So it was a multiple faceted 450-page book. But most people would look at that and compare it to the fable of 120 pages. And they're like, I don't need that. I can do that on a plane. I'm going to read the fable.
So let's talk about some of the stories that are in the book. Maybe you give us some teasers, and like maybe your day at the funeral home would be a good one.
Yeah,
Why in the world would you go to a funeral home?
That's an intense one. Some are funny, some are light, some are heavy, some are inspirational. Like they're all over the place. That one, well, in my career, I was a management consultant as well, and so one of my specialties was either team building, and a lot of times I get hired at retreats to do team building for the people in the retreat, to kind of break up the conference a little bit and get them to form relationships. Anyways, or I would teach about authenticity and leadership. Those are my two conference team building things. So the funeral owners, actually, that it's quite a system, and that all the top funeral homes in the country have a conference that they go to, and I became one of their speakers, and then I slowly became one of their consultants. And I was blown away about spending in-depth time with these owners. Like at the conference, late at night, they'd be drinking, laughing, crying, telling stories, hugging. I mean, like I've never seen such powerful, authentic relationships in my life. And so, and I wanted to keep working with this industry, which I did for a number of years. So in Denver, one of the leaders of that whole national group has a series of funeral homes in Denver. And so I asked him, you know, reluctantly, because part of me did not want to do this, but I felt like if that's going to be my client, plus I want to know what they're talking about. I want to get the humor. I didn't, but I did. And so I asked him, could I spend a day at your funeral home and could you put me through everything as an observer? Like, can I see everything? And I can't tell you how much I was hoping he'd say no. And in fact, he thought it was such a great idea that he put the schedule together. And so that's a story about what my day at the funeral home was and how it changed my life. I mean, it's an intense story, but, and the bottom line of the story is all the people that work in those funeral homes, they're not 9 to 5 mentality. They're like, this is my purpose, people. And you don't see that in companies very often, but you do at the funeral homes. And so I wanted to kind of understand what that life was like. And so I wrote about it in that chapter.
How about, another one? How about, slip sliding away?
Okay, when I went to college, that's when Animal House came out. That's when streaking happened. And of course, me and my buddies had to do streaking. So it's a streaking story. It's pretty funny. How do I say this without telling you the whole story? So we didn't know what we were doing. And so, and we were all kind of shy anyways. So we contacted to the campus radio station, a women's dormitory, and let them know that we'll be streaking at 9 o'clock. Which was not a good idea. And we were so nervous that we had ski masks because we were, you know, it was a mountain college in Colorado. We had ski masks and
You
water.
Put them on your head, I'm assuming.
And water balloons, because that's how fearful we were, and it blew up. And it was a funny tragedy, like not a tragedy, but how it ended, it was a disaster, but it was,
It was a really fun story though.
but it was about my one streaking experience.
All right, let's talk about a different one. How about the tale of two women?
Yeah, well, so my high school girlfriend, I went to junior prom with. And then my senior year, my family moved to Colorado. So that ended the relationship anyway. So I knew it was not going to go much past this junior prom. She's a beautiful woman. I mean, like, beautiful. And she was, you know, sweet, sensitive, introverted. Like, I could not believe I was even hanging out with her. Like, she was way over my level. But somehow we became friends and we went to junior prom together. And I felt like I kind of got her out of her shyness because next year, even though I wasn't at that high school, she started dating the captain of the basketball team and she became extremely popular. That's all I ever heard from her. 13 years later, I get a call from a high school friend who I hadn't talked to for 13 years. Screaming on the phone, get to your TV and turn it on. Your girlfriend is shooting up the school.
Oh.
I mean, I was just in, and I first thought, which girlfriend? I could think of a couple others that, and I did, you know, and this, I forgot what year it was, but I turned it on and it was happening live on national television. She had already shot up the school and then had escaped in a car and she crashed in a very wealthy neighborhood where I grew up. broke into a house, held a family hostage with guns. And that's when I turned the TV on. So she was still alive. And there were helicopters, SWAT teams, you know, and my heart was just pounding because I could not grasp how the girl, the cute, sweet girl I knew, became this mass shooter. And that's what the story's about, is I tell what happened that day. She ended up killing herself in the bedroom. And nobody in my hometown, still to this day, if you bring up her name, Lori Dan, they're like, don't go there. Like, nobody appreciates even that memory. But yet I was stuck because I knew, hence the tale of two women. I still couldn't put the two together. And so that's what the story is about, is the conundrum, as that person said. And I had no one to talk to because nobody wanted to, don't you dare bring that up. You know, and it was very bizarre.
That brings me to a question I was supposed to ask on page 1, which is, some of these stories are easier to write than others, I'm sure. That must have been a difficult one.
Well, because I hadn't seen her for 13 years, at least I didn't.
Oh, some distance. Yeah.
There was, but the difficult stories, well, you know, because remember, this was going to be a legacy book at first. And so I wanted personal, vulnerable stories in there too. They're all really kind of vulnerable stories, but so, you know, and I put the story about both my parents passing and kind of the similarities and what that was like for the family. The story of my little cute dog getting attacked by 2 large dogs in my backyard while I'm sitting in the garage listening to sports radio. And oh God, that's the hardest one because I don't think I've still processed that one. And then story about being fired, which I told in this room at one of the special topics, which was very humiliating story, but yet it has a happy ending. And so, so those are probably the 3 hardest. Oh, I put a dating story. Of course, you already know one of my girlfriends. It's called The Dating Game, but it comes back to haunt me whenever I'm dating somebody. So I want to read why. Okay, so because a lot of like if I'm dating somebody, it's not, and I don't date that much, but like I want to read your books, I want to know more about you, and I'm hesitant. So, but okay, so I'm going to read this and then I'll tell you, and you'll probably be able to tell what they would ask me right away. This is at the end of the story. On my radio show, my co-host was a woman, and you know we had fun and we would kid with each other. So she's like, "We got to have a dating game show where women call in to date you." I'm like, "Really?" So she made sure we did that, and so that's part of what the story's about, is kind of that experience. But then I go off thinking about women for me, and so this is toward the end. I go, I want to meet somebody who makes me feel giddy again. I remember the first time I ever sat next to Carol Hook at a 6th grade basketball game. Every pore in my body radiated with infatuation. I could barely breathe. I had a crush on her for as long as I can recall, but was too timid to ever talk to her. Here I was sitting next to the woman of my dreams, and all I could say was, "So who are you pulling for?" Really? First off, no one says, "Who are you pulling for?" Secondly, we went to the same school. But that's not what I'm talking about. I was so dumbfounded that I could barely put a sentence together, let alone make any sense. I was giddy. I want to feel that way again. So guess what they might ask me?
That make you feel giddy.
Of course. And I'm on the spot at that moment.
Every time.
Yeah. I should not have put that story in there.
Should have put your name on the book. You got your picture plastered all over the cover.
I know.
It'd be hard to deny. So a couple other things about you. I know that you go on a solo retreat every summer to Boulder, Colorado. And you did that again this year. So what's that about?
Yeah. Well, in Boulder, there's Chautauqua also. And they were at one point the same concept, and then the one in Boulder kind of took a different turn, but it's still from the historical Chautauqua concept. And so they still have educational programs and whatever. But in Boulder, Colorado, it's called the Flatiron Mountains. If you ever see a picture of Boulder, it's always these beautiful sharp mountains. It looks like Telluride almost. And on the base of it is where Chautauqua is, and then they have cabins, little log, little cabins, and you can rent them out. And so, there's a story in here about that, and it's really more about how I go, what I do during my solo retreat. And I know Tony and Roe particularly want to hear this because they love this concept. So you can do it anyway, but I do it because I'm a reflective person, and I've had like major breakthroughs on this retreat, and I want to tell you kind of why I think I do. But now I journal, and you don't have to journal to do a solo retreat, but I do. And sometimes my journaling's like in depth, and sometimes it's just this dear diary, here's what I did today, But I do it to kind of keep a record. So when I go on this solo retreat, 3 to 4 days, the first day is I read my journal for the previous 6 months. While I'm reading, I keep 2 lists: highlight, low light. It's got to be a highlight to make the highlight, not just something that was great, nice. It's got to be like something significant, and low light's got to be something kind of significant. And it's a running list. So this is more you might want to know, but this is kind of my process. So after the first day, I've read through the whole journal, I've made my 2 lists, and of course the highlights are 4 times longer than the lowlights. But then I look at both lists because it not only gives me context for the last 6 months, but the highlights, I can see things in it. Like, are they mostly from this, from that? Is there a balance? Is it, and then I look at the lowlights, and I'm really looking at patterns or areas where I got stuck or that made me feel really bad. And because those are going to eventually become goals for the next 6 months. So I need that for starters. Then the second part is I write thought-provoking questions. I do those I keep a running list. I'm going to share a couple of them with you that I just wrote the other day. But like when I think of a thought-provoking question that I need time to think through, where I can't just answer it, like I need to be relaxed and reflective to actually have an answer. And I typically have like 20 thought-provoking questions. And that's the bulk of the retreat. And I could go on a hike and, or I could go into town. It's not a silent retreat. It's just a solo retreat. But I type out my answers. And then usually by the time I do that, I already know what I call them intentions, but what the goals are for the next 6 months, because I've just reviewed the whole 6 months and have re-experienced everything and diagnosed the highs and lows. I'm pretty clear on what I need to focus on for the next 6 months. And where the breakthroughs come is in the thought-provoking questions. I'll just give you an example. They're questions, some of them could be like, what's the meaning of life? But no, these are questions for me. And there's a context around these questions, but I just want you to get a feel for them, because I found that, talking about being honest with yourself, one of the easiest ways to be honest with yourself is to ask yourself the tough questions and give yourself space to answer them. All right, so I have to give you some context, but question that I did answer on the retreat is, where has spring break geese gone? What I mean by that is, when I was a snowbird for 2 years, I just wanted to be on a continuous spring break when I was here partying and having fun, going on boats and you know, and then I'd go back to Denver and I'd get serious. That was kind of my goal. Well, the last 2 years I've lived here full time, gotten very involved with Aspect, and I don't see spring break geese as much. And that was disappointing. And so I wanted to spend time, like, why is that? And where did he go? And how do I bring him back? That's an example of a thought-provoking question. And another one, and this one's a little more relevant to today, right now, is, I don't know if any of you saw that there's a PACT study at USF on dementia.
Yeah.
So, my father was starting to get that at like 84. And so I thought, why not? I should do that. Because who knows, maybe I got that gene and all that stuff. So I went and they started testing me, and I got annoyed with the questions. Like, I got frustrated now, like I didn't want to play anymore,
Yeah.
kept subtracting 7 or 8 over and over, and then coming up with all these things that I don't know, I just started checking out in the questions. And then they left the room and came back to give me my score.
Oh, no.
And I failed. Failed. And then they gave me a sheet of 3 places I could go check out if I want to do more research on my potential dementia. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm glad I failed, because I don't have the patience if this is what this is going to be like. Math test in reverse, like, oh, give me a break. Okay, but am I avoiding something as well? So here's my question. Did I really disengage from PAC tests, or could I possibly have early dementia? Like, I was quick to dismiss it and to judge them. All right, that's an example of a thought-provoking question that I can't just answer. Like, I gotta, and thanks to Joetta, I'm gonna do a 23andMe health thing. Like, that's gonna be part of the solution. I do a little more research, but like, I need to spend time on that just to make sure. Anyways, those thought-provoking questions are like life-changing for me. And sometimes I have these. Oh, one other thing about it. And this might seem a little woo-woo to some of you, but because I'm answering these questions in a comfortable space, in a beautiful location, under no pressure, and I want to answer them, I feel like my higher self actually answers the questions. Because when I go back and look at my responses, I can't believe I wrote that. Like, it seems beyond my ability, like a wiser self answered those questions. And I realize the only time I get in that state of mind is when I'm in a space where I allow those dynamics to be in place. So that's the value of the solo retreat. And you can design them any way, but that I'll never give up.
And tell us about your relationship to the Renaissance Festival out in Colorado.
Well, a lot of the stories in the book are about overcoming adversity or risk or challenge. And I had a lot of challenges and risks that I overcame, but the context is, because, I'm kind of even though a lot of you only see me when I'm presenting, so you probably think I'm more extroverted, I'm total introvert, shy, quiet guy. Unless I have a role to play, I'm a different, I have, two. So I went to the Renaissance Festival and I noticed they got these giant puppets, like 8 feet, with the big heads.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking, I could do that, because I could still be an introvert. Because you're inside a puppet with a big backpack, basically, and you're working the arms. And so I'm like, I'm gonna apply for a puppet at the Renaissance Festival. And little did I know, and ironically, they were doing the training at the University of Denver where I was working. So I knew the facility, and what I didn't count on is, I just thought they'd go, okay, all the puppet people over there, and then you don't have to do any of these improv exercises, because you're in the freaking puppet outfit, you know, you don't even talk. You know, that's what I thought I was getting into. And instead, they're like, oh no, oh no. You need two characters, one, when you're not in the puppet, you need to have one where you're out on the grounds entered. And I'm like, absolutely not. And my heart's pounding, and the people that were showing up, like 150, these were regulars, like they came in outfits. This is like the very first day, and they were speaking with English dialect. Like, I was such an outcast. And so, I got through a couple exercises, and I'm like, how do I get out of here? And I didn't know a soul there, and I didn't know the director, I didn't know anybody there. So now they moved to this part where the king and queen were standing there, and then every person had to go up by themselves and either curtsy or bow in English dialect, which I had no clue what that was, and introduce their character. Well, I 3 strikes before I, like, there's just no way. So I start to sneak out. You know, they're standing, so I'm like, and I'm going for the door. I'm like, because I am so out of here. And then once I put my hands on the door, all of a sudden from a loudspeaker, Greg Geeson, where are you going? How did she know my name? And everybody looked at me as my hands were on the door. I'm like, nowhere. And it was so humiliating, but what I realized at that moment was that's probably as low a point as I could be in terms of my insecurity and everything. And I realized that the only way was up. And I found a way to turn it around, to create a freaking character and just go for it for 8 weeks that summer. And so whenever I get in a position where I'm like, I can't do it, I go back to that moment. I'm like, yes, you can. If you really want to, you can. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Well, we've got more questions here that were on our pre-assigned list. But I have some other questions that I developed that I think.
just like you.
One of the first one is an easy one. It's a trivia question.
Oh, no.
But you have to answer it. So in reading this book, the reader is going to feel like they know you without ever having met you. What comes across to me in reading the book is that you're a person of calm confidence and sure of yourself. And is this because we have 3 reasons? A, because your training and expertise in resolving conflict. B, is it simply your natural state of being? Or C, does it disguise your internal doubts and discomfort?
Yes. Well, it is all 3. I mean, you know, the reality is, you know, being in the human growth potential field, that's why I put myself through a lot of these challenges, was so I could be a better teacher. You know, I mean, you know, walk the talk kind of thing. And I meet colleagues that are like-minded. So in that sense, I do have a comfort level, you know, with a lot of this work. So that part's true. What was the second one?
Simply your natural state.
Oh, yeah, I think it is. It is my natural state. Not always, but I mean, for the most part, it is. Well, as you can see with the retreat, the solo retreat, like who does that? Right? I mean, you do?
Of course.
Yeah. Well, so no matter what happens, I'm gonna come back to it. Like I think with a lot of us, my greatest lessons have been through my errors, mistakes, screw ups. And that's what the book has, a lot of those in it, and then how I learned from it. And so I always see those as opportunities, not right away, I might add. Once I release the emotion from the situation, then I can go to the place of being the student again,
Right.
you know? But usually there's a little bit of a phase
So
there.
you mentioned this earlier about something about people being honest with themselves. How does a person know if they're being honest with themselves? 'Cause we're pretty good at disguising, even to ourselves, how we really feel.
Well, I'd go back to what I said earlier about the thought-provoking questions, because if I was your friend, I am your friend.
You are.
And we do have these conversations.
Mhm.
Usually with a beer, but we do. I would say to you, like I would say to myself, are you being honest with yourself, or have you thought that out? Or could there be another option in
Yeah.
that scenario? The kind of facilitation kind of questions, which are the thought-provoking questions that I ask myself. That's how I know if I'm being honest, because I have to answer the second and third question that I'm asking. So in my case, I won't let it go away until I feel like either I learned something from it or that I'm good. And I can tell from a visceral level if I'm good. Right? Most of us can, you can tell if there's tension or something's incomplete in a relationship or in a conversation. And in my case, it might mean I need to go reflect on it, but then if my stomach's still turning, I got to do something with it, because otherwise it's going to haunt me and I'm going to create defense mechanisms and all this other stuff. And
Right.
so,
So, you've written and talked, I know, about authenticity. Are there public role models for authenticity? Are there people that you believe are truly authentic and what they present to the public?
well, I think what we see a lot is we see moments of authenticity from people. And then a lot of the people that are my teachers, so to speak, I see moments, but I'm seeing their professional side. So a lot of it's, rehearsed as well. Sure. But you can tell how vulnerable someone might be. The novel I wrote, has two main characters, right? I already explained the old guy and the young guy. Well, the old guy, I modeled him after my favorite graduate school professor, Dr. Mack, and that's the name in the book. And he was the only graduate school professor I had that put you as a person first and then you as a student second. And as a result, I immediately latched on to him. And it's an interesting story. He got Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And I was writing the book at the time, and I was so excited that I was using him, so I would send him a chapter. And finally, his wife emailed me. She goes, "Will you please stop sending chapters? He's getting frustrated because he can't remember what he just read." But the compliment that came after that was, after I published that book, she said, "I nailed him. I got him 100% in how I created that character." And then the other character, this young, naive supervisor, of course, symbolically was also me in my career, but it was my favorite supervisor at Washington University in St. Louis. He was very authentic. Dr. Mack was authentic. And those are my first two big role models right out of the gate. And then in Meet Our Members, just another angle there. I did think that President Anarelli, when he did his Meet Our Members, he's one of the most authentic people I've ever met. In fact, you got to contain him. He's so authentic. And even Kelly Kirshner was.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to do with Meet Our Members is, your career is important, but I want your life story. So I'm trying to move it toward the authentic conversations, because I think that's much more meaningful, and that's something that you'd want to say about and give to your kids or show your friends versus just repeating your career. Then you did this and you did this. So I'm moving it in that direction intentionally to get to the authenticity piece.
Well, before we run out of time, I know there's one thing I'd like to ask you to do, and that is, would you read a section of your book? I know there's a story.
Yeah.
There's one story in here that is not a real life story. It is a work of fiction. But it's a great story, and it'd be great for you to read it.
Okay. It's called The Chain Reaction. I always get nervous when I read. With each story, I have a quote first, then the story. The quote is, "If you think you are too small to be effective, you have never been in bed with a mosquito." Okay, and this is the only story that's fiction, because the message is so powerful, I wanted to have it in the book. Okay, a light blue car stalls in the right lane of a major highway. A backup ensues. It's 6:45 a.m. on a Monday. Within 10 minutes, the stalled car is pushed to the side, sticking out ever so slightly onto the highway, just enough. Within those same 10 minutes, the backup has grown to more than a mile of highway with no end in sight. Now cars coming in the other direction begin to slow down, rubbernecking their way past the obstruction. It's not even 7 a.m. yet, and traffic in both directions has come to a near standstill. The main roads feeding to and from the highway have backed up as well. Bob, the CFO of a large company downtown, leaves his house in the suburbs and heads toward the highway. Running late already, he needs to make up time. He believes taking the highway will help. Within seconds, he knows that something isn't right. Cars ahead of him are bumper to bumper, and he's still a mile away from the highway. Bob curses his circumstance and pounds the dashboard. He's going to miss a very important meeting, so he picks up his cell phone. Cheryl, Bob's secretary, wonders why he is being so rude on the phone. She shakes her head after the call, wondering why she puts up with his ranting. According to Bob's directive, Cheryl has to drop everything she is doing to reschedule his meeting. Contacting 7 people and coordinating 7 schedules will take up much of her morning, causing her to fall way behind for the day. Later, Amy waits at a restaurant for her birthday lunch with Cheryl, her best friend. It's 12:10 and Cheryl is never late. More time passes and still no Cheryl. Amy, feeling like a loser sitting by herself on her birthday, calls Cheryl to ask where she is. Cheryl, flustered and overwhelmed with work, is short with Amy on the phone. She has completely forgotten Amy's birthday. After the call, Amy feels distraught and embarrassed and calls in sick for the remainder of the day. She can't stop thinking about why Cheryl stood her up on her birthday. That night, Amy can't sleep, tossing and turning all night. The next morning, she is completely exhausted from being awake all night. She's a bit depressed as well. The sun is bright that morning. As Amy floors the gas in order to merge onto the highway, she fails to notice a light blue car sitting on the side of the road, partially in her way. It's the same car that stalled the previous day and has never been removed. Before she can react, she rear ends the light blue car, causing her own car to slide into oncoming traffic. The first car to hit her flips over, killing the mother who is driving the car and seriously injuring her 4-year-old daughter in the back seat. 8 more cars crash while trying to avoid the initial accident. This causes a traffic jam that made the previous day delay seem like a walk in the park. In the end, there was 1 fatality and 4 seriously injured people, including the 4-year-old child. Fortunately, the child recovers. However, she is traumatized over losing her mother and it's impacted for the rest of her life. The lesson is one sentence. Sometimes we think that what we do doesn't impact others. The two sentences. The truth is, everything we do impacts others in some way, shape, or form. It's the butterfly effect, essentially.
I should note also that, Geese has a website. Geeson.com is also, new, and it highlights all three of the books that you've written, plus your life coaching services. Before we end, I just wanted to say that, Geese gave me a copy of his book. And I've read it. I had the hard copy version. Somebody left in the mailroom, probably you. And I read that a couple years ago. But so I read the new one as well, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But since it's a book about journeys, I wanted to share with you one of my favorite books about a journey. Any of you read Joseph Campbell?
Oh, sure.
I want to read a paragraph.
During my early career.
This is from Joseph Campbell's telling about the story of Sir Galahad and the quest for the Grail. He says, in the story of Sir Galahad, the knights agree to go on a quest, but thinking it would be a disgrace to go forth in a group, each enters the forest at one point or another where they saw it to be the thickest. All of those places where they found no way or path. Where there is a way or a path, it's someone else's way. Each knight enters the forest at the most mysterious point and follows his own intuition. What each brings forth is what never before was on land or sea, the fulfillment of his unique potentialities, which are different from anybody else's. All you get on your life way are little clues. It's a wonderful story, and when any knight sees the trail of another and thinks that he's getting there, and he starts to follow the other's track, he goes astray entirely. So I want to give this book to you.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you all.
And you can win a free book at the social. I got one of those wheels. You get the one spin per person.
All right.
If I already have the book and I win, can I get a picture of you from that little episode at 9 p.m.?
Of course you can.
Yeah.
You are an optimist.
I'm assuming.
Thanks, Keith.
For a little.